Well, one thing, hi, this is Phil Kaveny back again with another one of my programs, and things are I'm thinking about talking about two things right as we speak now. And one of the things I really like about talking to a camera is the camera can never interrupt me. Well, with that in mind, I think what I want to talk about is something called the paradox of powerlessness. And a few weeks, I think I just finished it a week ago, I took the psychology of addiction from Professor Matthews. And it was an amazing and very practically worthwhile course, especially since it was sort of a couple generation upgrade about what I knew about neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is something, if you studied cognitive neurology when I was a young person, it was just in its infancy. And it's just sort of a way of saying that the brain responds to outside stimulates in such a way that behavior patterns develop along certain lines. You have sort of centers within your brain that produce a gratifying substance called dopamine. Now, anybody who really knows about this, just bear with me, because what I'm trying to say is that within a lot of programs where people become addicted, they find something. I myself am an alcoholic in recovery for 47 years and a compulsive overeater. Okay, well, if I look back at the last several months, I am a compulsive overeater who is now 20 kilograms lighter than I was when I started. And what I want to talk about here, I'm going to mention 12-step programs as I use them. And this is only for me, and I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, and I'm pretty sure I'm within the public domain, because I think copyright ran out of the big book or something like that. But one of the things that you deal with when you have a compulsion or an addiction is your inability to do anything about it through willpower. Willpower is a failure after a failure after a failure, after a promise, after an embarrassment, which then leads to another failure. But the paradox to me, and this is philosophically non-trivial, is that in admitting to your powerlessness over your addiction to food or alcohol, and we suspect now gambling too, because gambling is a behavior which neurologically seems to affect the same centers of the brain as do substance abuse, that by admitting to you that your powerlessness, and somehow turning to something greater than oneself, you are no longer powerless. And what that means pragmatically is stuff that you might say, well, I really don't want to eat a quarter pound of saltines, a quarter pound of cheese, quarter pound of salami, a couple slices of toast, a handful of olives, fall asleep, and in 20 minutes, 2 hours, my wife is going to come down and make me a dinner like a Norwegian farm wife, all of which I'm going to eat. And now, like 3 or 4 months later, now that I've been sort of doing different things, working with my doctor, and following with this program, I can say, well, you know, I can take a whole can of steamed vegetables and I can add Worcestershire and Tabasco sauce because they have no calories at all. And seemingly I can walk by all of the stuff that I couldn't walk by before, and I really want what I'm having. And I can think of having alternatives that I would have never thought of before become a reality. This goes back, I'm going to go back now to 1971. I was teaching a free university course at UW-Madison. One of my friends in a book we're writing together described UW-Madison in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s as a place where windows were open that would be closed again forever shortly. And what that meant was that we had a free university, and if you had a legitimate interest in wanting to teach a university course, not for credit, all you had to do was go to the dean's office and they would give you a room and list it on a course catalog. And so I taught a course on Hermann Hesse. And I taught it to a bunch of my ex-athlete, very smart, but heavy drinking friends. And one of them, who's dead now 20 years, in this fog of us discussing Hermann Hesse and some of the parallels between him and T.S. Eliot, to the editor Ezra Pound, said, you know, this philosopher Spinoza may be right. And there was this moment of clarity from these drunk ex-athletes. We all looked at Norton and he said, yeah, he said that in order to be free, you got to give up something. But if you give up the thing that you give up, then you're pretty much free to do whatever else you want. And of course we finished our half-gallon things of beer and went on, and not much changed for a while, but I remember then I got the first job after college, after 104 job interviews where I was always overqualified or too smart or too something. Whatever I wasn't going to get a job. And I guess it was sort of, makes me think of the Nobel Prize in Literature winner Bob Dylan saying, look out kid, it's something you did. I don't know when, but you're doing it again. And I guess that was the way I was feeling until I got a job interview by basically threatening a guy named Tony Messino, who was the lead worker of the Memorial Union night crew. And I think he flipped a coin between calling the university SWAT team and hiring me. And I guess he decided it was easier to hire me. And so I remember thinking, well, this is the first job I've got, and this sure beats getting money from my mother, or babysitting for my Aunt Cleo, and having to get my beard trimmed because she didn't want me taking care of her dachshund looking like Charles Manson. So I remember waking up, and I thought, well, I'm not going to drink during the week. And as that thought entered my mind, I was reading War and Peace. And as I read War and Peace, there was a scene. It's a great book by Tolstoy, and it's mostly about Russia and the Napoleonic Wars. And one of his theses is that history only seems to be made by great men, but really it's made by intangible forces that we struggle to understand. And I thought, boy, that's pretty good stuff. But on my days off, I'm getting drunk again. And I'm going through a 2-day hangover where I really can't read. Now, maybe if I stop drinking, my head won't hurt so much, and I'll be able to read more of this Tolstoy. And I could tell a story different ways, and each way would have a different aspect of it. And I would talk about the beautiful girl who got me out of the snowbank, and I would talk about the idea that I was just going to hide out because I was so embarrassed, or the idea that I was going to wait for a really good party. But somehow or other, February 2nd, 1971, I stopped. I stopped doing this one thing. I gave up this one thing, and it wasn't much longer after that because of my rather heroic appearance at 6'1" and 400 pounds, that somebody asked me to be in a film. And if I was in a film, well, I had something to talk about. I could talk to women about being a filmmaker rather than an ex-wrestler and a champion beer chugger. And as I went through this, I had an idea that I wanted to write a play because I had had some personal things happen in my life. Friends that had died in Vietnam, disappointments in my own experience, a lot of things that were just churning to get out, except I had to learn how to write my play. And that play is for sale on Amazon now, and I'm still making films, and I'm still working on projects. And really, once I admitted that I was powerless and turned to something other than myself, maybe it was art for me, I don't know. I turned out that I had more choices than I ever thought. Well, I just wanted to say that I have a whole bunch of books and prep work to do for the next show. And I'm actually going to get them in front of me because the books are sort of what's behind the talk I'm getting today. Because now, 40, 45, 47 years later, I'm experiencing another kind of creative rush and wondering what to do next. And the paradox of powerlessness, I think, is a pretty big deal. And when I have coffee with Professor Matthews, we'll see if he'll give me an independent study in it. Next show, I'm going to talk about 20 books that have been really important to me and helped me make some pretty important decisions recently. And I'm going to feature some public intellectuals, Richard Thayer, Malcolm Gladwell, Annie Duke, and a couple other ones that I think are well worth reading. And we're going to try to break down some of these walls of the academic world and treat it like the public sphere. So goodbye and good reading.